Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. My name is Paul Siegel and this is a new video tutorial on this ongoing series of tutorials for Armature 9. What I'm going to do today is take a step back and go over some basics and talk a little bit about anatomy and how to associate the landmarks that the armature provides with actual anatomical landmarks on the human figure. And I'm going to work on the male and female. I'll start with the male on the left and then do the female on the right. And I'm going to start out by working on the ribcage. Now, the new armature, the 2014.9 version of the armature, has this little arc on the bottom of the torso. It's actually there physically in the shape of the piece because I thought that would be an important landmark to have, because essentially it allows you to build the rest of the ribcage from there, as you'll see me do here. Now the top of the pelvis itself is a pretty faithful representation for where the pelvis begins, and in the ribcage you can see that as I'm completing it, I have it go slightly below where the piece itself is, but for the most part it's pretty close. As I work on the male figure, there are certain parts of the silhouette that come very close to the armature and some parts that provide a lot more room, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this more in a minute. But this is especially true if you look at how I'm fleshing out the legs. Notice how the pieces come very close, the femur pieces come very close to the exterior of the leg, and most of the leg is on the interior. So I've highlighted there the bottom of the groin area, but in the case of the male, of course, this protrudes out further. And I'm just fleshing out the legs here. You'll notice the calves also have that, where the femurs really represent more of the exterior than the interior of the leg. And really just blocking things out at this point. Now here what I'm doing with red is trying to highlight what I was just talking about and show you how much of that volume is actually taking place on the inside rather than on the outside, both for the upper leg and lower leg. Now, men tend to have a much more of a V-shaped torso, so you'll see here as I flesh out the upper part of the body, a lot of that silhouette is coming outside of the actual armature shapes. And here I'm fleshing out some of the interior details, getting some of the shoulders blocked in. And for the arms, you can assume that the armature pieces represent pretty much somewhere in the center of the arm. How you emphasize that when you draw it is really going to depend on whether you're drawing male or female, or whether you're trying to get some sort of creature. Now that line for the top of the head where it's flat represents the hairline. This is important because you want to complete that when you draw the head and draw that curve toward the top to complete the actual shape of the skull. Otherwise your heads are going to show up too small and it's not going to look very natural. So there you can see a pretty good representation of the male figure. And here again I'm with red trying to highlight where in the case of the male figure the drawing of the body protrudes outside of the structures provided by the armature itself. In some cases it comes really close, in some cases there's a lot of space. And this is essentially what's going to ultimately be responsible for making a figure look masculine versus feminine. But the frame and structure and proportion are surprisingly the same. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the female now, and I've already blocked out the rib cage, as you can see there. The rib cage and the pelvis are the same spot. Really, it's more a matter of emphasis. Notice how the back is much more narrow and the pelvis is much wider. There's a lot more space between the pelvis and the structure provided by the armature. Shoulders tend to slope downward, although I found that with the female figure you can bring the shoulders a little bit higher as well. And again, with the head, you got to complete the top. Women tend to have larger foreheads than men, so that's especially important. And they have much more V-shaped faces, so you don't want to have a really wide jaw. You want to have more of a pointy chin, whereas for guys you can get away with more of a square-shaped chin. So here I'm identified the the bottom of the pelvis, and of course it doesn't protrude out for women. And you can begin the leg right from there. And notice how much more leg is showing up on the exterior versus the interior. And the arms are thinner, of course. And for the women, I tend to find that drawing the arms so that most of it is showing up on the inside rather than on the outside of the arm joints gives me a much kind of a narrower back. Here I'm blocking out the legs. But again, the proportion is the same. The same structure is used, the same landmarks are used for the same parts of the human figure. It's really how you build up the volume around it that's going to determine whether it looks female or masculine. You can see me highlighting that now in red and showing the difference between the male and female, especially with the pelvis area and the legs. There's a little bit showing up there for the belly, not really much showing up at all for the back, as you can see. And the arms also are much thinner for women than they are for men. Now these are of course just averages. Everybody has a unique body. So there you can see, using the same exact skeletal structure. So here I'm going to show how this all applies. These are some pictures that I took of the 2014.9 version of the armature. And I'm just zooming in on one of them. And I'm going to put a layer and fill it with black and lower the opacity so that I can draw over the top of that. So there's that little curve that I was talking about, and I'm using that to help me start out the rib cage and the top of the pelvis. So I'm essentially following the same steps as I did before, but now that it's in perspective, I really have to leverage my knowledge of anatomy, my experience with life drawing to be able to really do this. Like for example, he's bending forward, or yeah, in this case it's a he. So I need a lot of flesh building up toward the front. Need to have a sense for where the pectoral muscles are and where the glutes are, how much fat is building up in different places. Here I'm blocking out the deltoid and showing how it attaches to the clavicle. Now all this stuff is just knowledge of anatomy. So you know, even though the armature provides a very faithful representation and guide, understanding anatomy is going to be crucial to be able to do this effectively. Blocking out some of the muscles of the neck. The things you want to be cautious about is that the armature can get into poses that humans can't necessarily get into. So you could easily create something that looks very unnatural. This is sort of getting, is kind of close to looking a little impossible. The way the head is extended up is probably a little too far. The arm that's coming back like that is too far. This is a position that a normal human probably wouldn't be able to get into. But it's dynamic and fun, so I thought it might be a good one to work on. Here I am blocking out the leg and the feet. And the great thing about, you know, this is you get an exact reference for perspective and foreshortening. So this is obviously a male character, but it gives you a sense for how you can work. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move on to another photo, and I'm going to create a female. Now one thing I should point out is here, notice the right leg is sticking out quite a bit from the armature. So sometimes, because the pieces allow you to put things in positions that aren't necessarily natural, sometimes you're probably going to have to improvise like I am here. And even though I'm sticking close to the armature as reference, there are some areas where I'm going to have to stray a little bit from it. But again, I started the same way here, working with the torso, building the rib cage, then the pelvis. And for the legs here, I'm finding that having most of the leg build toward the inside of the reference is going to work best, because I ended up taking those legs a little too far out, and you can see I'm kind of changing the position of the feet there. So sometimes you're going to have to improvise like that. You definitely don't want to feel like you have to be a slave to your reference. You never really want to do that. You always want to use your eyes first. And the reference is really just a guide. But again, I'm using the exact same armature here, and already it's looking very feminine. And I'm sticking really close to the landmarks that are provided. I've built up the head above the armature, the headpiece, and this is important. Again, the top line represents the hairline, not the actual top of the head. And the nice thing about this is I don't have to worry about foreshortening or perspective, so I can draw with confidence and not have to second guess myself. So there you have it, guys. Please subscribe to the channel, youtube.com/armature9. I have a lot of tutorials that I've already posted, and I'm going to be posting some other ones about sculpture and how to customize your armature and build creatures, and even do some hacking tricks where you can drill pieces and create little gadgets out of them. So I hope that you'll subscribe and follow the channel. And if you have any questions or comments, please post them. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks. Bye.